It is gone! My precious is gone!
That's right, Smeagol. There is no Tolkien in there. My Govanin. How do you do? Tolkien Shed speaking, and today in Why Did the Rings of Power Fail, we'll discuss the show's relation with John Ronald Reuel Tolkien himself. We'll look at this issue in 3 dimensions. First of all, we'll look at the lore that Tolkien established and how does the show follow it. The second issue we'll look at will be the most powerful tool of Tolkien, language, more precisely dialogue, and how does the show use it. And finally, we'll look how much do they differ in terms of morality. Let's start with discussing the core elements in terms of the lore. The show changes the history of the most important jewels ever created, the Silmarils, that were the basis of the history of the First Age, of the whole history of the elves. There are 3 such jewels, and their fate is known. One ended up in the sea, one ended up deep in the earth, and one ended up in the skies. But according to the show, it was not the case. Either there was the 4th jewel, or one of them ended up in a tree, somehow. And this tree, being struck by lightning, created Mithril. Don't ask more questions, because there are no answers. We are just provided that. And this changes the entire history of the elves. But it is never accounted for. Second of all, the history of the elves is changed by giving Gil-galad, the king of the elves, the right to decide who will go to Valinor, the land of immortality and eternal happiness, and the right to decide who will not go there. But this is not a power he should hold. It is the power of the Valors, the gods of the world. And he, Gil-galad, has no right to decide upon this matter. Another change that the show introduces is the change to the history of the Rings of Power. I guess the show should be more careful with that. It is, after all, named after them, but apparently the show does not have respect for the history of those artifacts. So, the Elven rings, according to the show, were created first, not last, without any influence of Sauron. According to the show, Sauron was essential to the creating of these rings, and without him they wouldn't be made. So how does the show plan on setting the story right? I have no idea. The show also decides who will live and who will not, and in that matter also does not regard the law. For example, Celeborn, the husband of Galadriel, is, according to the show, dead, and you can do nothing about it. And finally, the history of particular characters is changed. For example, Elendil, who in the books was the prince in Númenor, but according to the Rings of Power, he was just a low noble and known to nobody. I can think only on one reason why such change was made, and it is to better introduce him, because the queen cannot know him, so somebody must introduce this new character to let the audience know who he is. But there would be better ways to do it, and without changing the essential parts and the essential history of this character, but I digress. Let's sum up it with saying that this show is basically mostly a fan fiction with Tolkien's name on it. When it clashes with the lore, it changes the lore. Maybe except for the names, but that's nothing praiseworthy. So, most of the time, there is nothing that we know from Tolkien. Now let's have a look at dialogue in the show. It is a large topic, it requires its own video, so here we will only discuss the relation of the dialogue and Tolkien. Tolkien, who was a master of language. He studied and taught languages. He documented them and he created languages. He used language to create his characters, to give them life, to root them in the world that he created, to make them memorable. And we do remember them to this day. We remember the words, the speeches of the powerful, and maybe those weaker, but still inspiring and moving. And the show was trying to be equally memorable, but, well, it failed to do so, and we'll have a look at 5 examples of that. First of all, there is the line, "Do you know why ship floats and the stone cannot?" Because the stone only looks downwards. Well, if you make a metaphor, you should also make sense. And, well, here we have an example of how not to do that. Then there is a tempest in me. Well, stating your emotions is rarely a good idea in writing, especially if you want your line to sound powerful and not cringe. But, well, here we have another example of how not to write a line for your character. Then there is the statement, "I am good," which sounds an awful lot as a pathetic attempt at copying "I'm Iron Man," "I am all the Sith," or "I am Groot." Well, those lines are remembered, and well, do you think that anybody will remember the line "I am good"? And then there is the answer to the question, "Why do you keep fighting?" That answer is, "Because I cannot stop." And, well, it adds nothing to the conversation. It sounds like, "Why do you do it?" "Because I do." It's how children speak, not adults. And finally, there is the famous, "The sea is always right," which, for example, does not make sense in the mouth of Elendil, who lost his wife on the sea. So maybe when you write dialogue, you should try to connect it to your characters and not force them to say something that they would never say. Well, by those and many, many other examples, we see that the shows and the Tolkien's dialogue cannot be further from equal. And finally, let's have a look at morality. Tolkien's Christian morality was present everywhere in his works. His morality was, his views on good and evil were present in the creation of his world, literally in the tales of how the world came to be. And the ideas of the eternal struggle between good and evil, of the power that corrupts, and finally of the minor acts of kindness and faithfulness that bring an end to evil, are the essential elements of his storytelling. So, how much of that do we see in the show? Let's have a look at the characters that we are supposed to follow and to admire. At Galadriel, who, instead of being this kind and wise leader, is war criminal, ready to torture prisoners of war and to murder the entire races, to commit orcicide. Let's look at Elrond, who is a lying bastard, who on many occasions lies to his friend and breaks an oath immediately after swearing it. And let's have a look at the hobbits, at the people who, by their kindness, by their extreme faithfulness, finally defeat Sauron. Here in the show, there are soulless murderers who are ready to leave their own in the wilderness. And, well, most that they will do for them is remember them during some sort of ceremony. They're ready to leave them and die. So, well, is this an example to follow? And now let's have a look at the bad guys. Well, are they so bad? Well, the show certainly tries to show them as evil, as much as it tries to show Elrond, Galadriel, and the hobbits as those that are good. But it fails to do so. What evil has Sauron made? We are only told that he killed Galadriel's brother and was Morgoth's right hand, but we never see anything particularly evil from him. Well, he's certainly better than Galadriel, who threatens to kill an entire race. And speaking of which, when it comes to other and Orcs, we are sympathizing with them. When we have these creatures that have a culture, that grieve their dead, that want to have a land to live on, and on the other hand, we have those that threaten to kill them all. Well, on which side are we supposed to be? And man, would I choose Ada over Galadriel to be my leader. So the morality in the show can be described as twisted and certainly not the same like Tolkien's. And so is the dialogue, so is the lore. So the most that the show has in common with Tolkien is seen in the credits where it says incorrectly that it is based on the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Well, that would be the end to today's video. Thank you for listening. I thank everybody that comments, that's subscribed and liked, and I hope to see you again very soon. Fare you well. Nova year.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.